Hello, my dear lore seekers. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories. Tonight, we retreat from the clamor of the waking world and journey into a tale of light and shadow, of a bond forged in laughter and tested by the cruelest of wars. We travel back to a time of whispered secrets and rising darkness, to an era defined by a friendship so brilliant it cast a long and tragic shadow across the history of the wizarding world. So find your comfort, quiet your thoughts, and let us delve into the lives of 4 young men, 4 brothers in all but blood, as we uncover the complete, heartbreaking history of the Marauders. This is the story of their friendship, their war, their betrayal, and the devastating cost of a conflict that would change the world forever. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now, let's begin. Our story begins not in the heat of battle, but within the ancient stone walls of Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, a place that, for many, was the only true home they had ever known. In the autumn of 1971, the Hogwarts Express thundered north, carrying with it a new generation of young witches and wizards, their minds alight with dreams of magic and adventure. Among them were 4 boys, strangers to one another, each carrying the unseen weight of their past and the boundless potential of their future. Their names were James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. On the surface, they were merely 4 first-year students, but destiny, in its intricate and often cruel design, had woven their futures together into a single, epic tapestry. James Potter was the first you would notice. He radiated an aura of effortless confidence, a product of a cherished and wealthy upbringing. Born to Fleamont and Euphemia Potter, elderly parents who had all but given up hope of having a child, James was the center of their world. He was loved, perhaps even doted upon, and it showed. He walked with a swagger, his head held high, his hazel eyes sparkling with a mischievous intelligence that often bordered on arrogance. His hair was perpetually untidy, sticking up at the back as if he had just dismounted a broomstick at high speed, which, more often than not, he had. Magic came easily to James. He was a gifted student, a prodigy in transfiguration and a natural on the Quidditch pitch. He possessed a quick wit and a sharp tongue, qualities that drew others to him like moths to a flame, yet also created friction with those who saw his confidence as mere conceit. There was a fundamental goodness in James, a fierce loyalty and a strong moral compass, but in his youth, it was often obscured by a layer of pride and a desperate need to be the center of attention. Then there was Sirius Black, and to understand Sirius, one must first understand the family he was so desperate to escape. He was the heir to the noble and most ancient House of Black, a lineage of pure-blood wizards who prided themselves on their wealth, their power, and their fanatical devotion to blood purity. The family motto, toujours pur, always pure, was less a statement of fact and more a declaration of war against anyone they deemed inferior, which included muggles, muggle-borns, and even wizards who did not share their extremist views. The Black family home at number 12, Grimold Place, was a dark and oppressive monument to their ideology, filled with ancient dark artifacts and the screaming portrait of Sirius's mother, Walburga. Sirius was nothing like them. Where they were dark, he was brilliant. Where they were cruel, he was fiercely loving. He was handsome, with aristocratic features, long dark hair and startling gray eyes that held a rebellious fire. He was sorted into Gryffindor, the first Black in generations to break the family's Slytherin tradition, an act of defiance that earned him the eternal scorn of his parents. At Hogwarts and in James Potter, Sirius found the family he had always craved, a family built not on blood and bigotry, but on acceptance and unwavering loyalty. He was a rebel, a rule breaker, and possessed a reckless bravery that sometimes tipped into recklessness. For Sirius, his friends were his anchor, his true north in a world that had tried to mold him into a monster. In a quieter corner of the same train compartment, one might find Remus Lupin, a boy who seemed to carry a premature weariness in his soft brown eyes. Remus's life had been irrevocably altered in a single terrifying night when he was just 4 years old. His father, Lyle Lupin, a respected authority on non-human spiritus apparitions, had insulted the werewolf Fenrir Greyback during an interrogation. Seeking revenge, Greyback forced his way into young Remus's bedroom and attacked him, cursing him with lycanthropy. From that day forward, Remus was a werewolf. Each month, at the full moon, he underwent an excruciating transformation into a mindless, violent beast. His parents loved him dearly, but they were heartbroken and terrified. They sought cures that did not exist and were forced to move from town to town, unable to explain their son's monthly disappearances and the telltale screams that echoed from their locked basement. Remus grew up isolated and afraid, convinced he was a monster, undeserving of friendship or a normal life. His acceptance to Hogwarts was a miracle, a direct intervention by Albus Dumbledore, who believed the boy deserved an education and a chance at a childhood. Dumbledore made special arrangements, planting the Whomping Willow on the grounds to conceal a tunnel leading to the Shrieking Shack, a remote house in Hogsmeade where Remus could transform in relative safety. Remus was intelligent, kind-hearted, and possessed a quiet sense of humor, but a deep-seated shame and the constant fear of his secret kept him on the periphery, an observer rather than a participant in the boisterous life of the school. And finally there was Peter Pettigrew. Small, mousy, and perpetually nervous, Peter was a boy who seemed to live in the shadow of others. He was not exceptionally talented, brave, or intelligent. He was, by all accounts, perfectly ordinary. In the competitive, often intimidating environment of Hogwarts, Peter gravitated towards those who were everything he was not. He was drawn to the confident charisma of James and the rebellious charm of Sirius. He admired their strength, their popularity, and their effortless command of magic. For Peter, friendship with these boys was a shield. It offered him protection, a sense of belonging and a borrowed importance that he could never achieve on his own. He was a follower, not a leader, quick to agree and eager to please. While James and Sirius saw in him a loyal, if somewhat timid admirer, they perhaps failed to see the deep-seated insecurity that gnawed at him. Peter's loyalty was born not of strength, but of weakness, a desperate need for the approval of those he considered his superiors. It was a flaw that, in the carefree days of their youth, seemed harmless, but in the crucible of war, it would prove to be a fatal one. The Sorting Hat, in its infinite wisdom, placed all 4 boys in Gryffindor, the house of courage, bravery, and determination. For James and Sirius, it was an affirmation of their nature. For Peter, it was an aspiration. For Remus, it was a terrifying mistake. He was certain that if his new housemates ever discovered his secret, he would be cast out, feared, and reviled. He tried to keep his distance, to remain unnoticed, but the magnetic personalities of James and Sirius were impossible to resist. They were drawn to Remus's quiet intelligence and his wry, gentle humor. They sensed his sadness, but did not pry. They simply included him. And Peter, ever the satellite, orbited this nascent star of friendship, content to be a part of their circle. The bond between them truly solidified in their second year, born from a secret that could have torn them apart. Remus's monthly disappearances became a source of mystery. He would vanish, returning days later, pale, exhausted, and covered in fresh cuts and scratches. He offered flimsy excuses, visiting his sick mother, a rare and recurring illness. But his friends were not fools. They were intelligent, curious, and deeply loyal. They noticed that his absences always coincided with the full moon. They began to piece together the clues, their magical education providing them with the terrible context for his symptoms. They did not confront him. Instead, led by the brilliant deductive reasoning of Sirius and the unwavering support of James, they discovered his secret on their own. For Remus, the moment of discovery was one he had dreaded his entire life. He expected fear, disgust, and rejection. He was prepared to pack his bags, to be expelled, to return to his life of lonely isolation. But what he received instead was something so radical, so unexpected, that it changed the course of his life forever. Unconditional acceptance. James, Sirius, and Peter did not see a monster. They saw their friend, their quiet, kind, studious friend who was suffering from a terrible curse. They were not afraid of him. They were angry for him. Angry at the injustice of his fate, at the pain he had to endure alone month after month. Their loyalty did not waver. It deepened. They did not abandon him. They resolved to help him. And the way they chose to help him was a testament to their extraordinary magical talent and the depth of their devotion. They embarked on one of the most difficult and dangerous pieces of magic known to the wizarding world, the process of becoming an animagus. An animagus is a witch or wizard who can transform themselves into an animal at will. The process is incredibly complex, fraught with peril, and requires years of dedication. A single mistake could result in a permanent state of half-human, half-animal transformation. The Ministry of Magic keeps a strict register of all known Animagi, and the process is heavily regulated. For 3 unregistered schoolboys to attempt it was not only illegal, but also breathtakingly ambitious. For 3 years, from their 3rd year to their 5th, they dedicated themselves to this secret, arduous task. They researched ancient texts in the library's restricted section, practiced complex transfiguration theory, and brewed difficult potions, all under the noses of their teachers, including the formidable Albus Dumbledore. The process required them to hold a single mandrake leaf in their mouths for an entire month, from one full moon to the next. They had to collect the chrysalis of a death's head hawk moth and place it in a silver teaspoon with the dew from a place that neither sunlight nor human feet had touched for 7 days. This concoction had to be brewed during a lightning storm, a component that could take months, even years, to procure. The risks were immense, but their motivation was pure. A werewolf is only a danger to humans. When Remus transformed, his mind was gone, replaced by the savage instincts of the wolf. But in the presence of animals, he was calmer. The violent struggle of his solitary transformation eased by the presence of a pack. If his friends could become animals, they could be with him. He would no longer have to be alone. By their 5th year, they had succeeded. Their triumph was a secret shared between the 4 of them, a symbol of their unbreakable bond. James Potter, with his proud and protective nature, became a stag, a noble and powerful animal. He was christened Prongs. Sirius Black, sleek, powerful, and a little dangerous, became a great, shaggy black dog, earning the name Padfoot. And Peter Pettigrew, small and able to slip through the cracks unnoticed, became a rat, whom they called Wormtail. Together with Remus, whom they affectionately nicknamed Moony in honor of his lunar cycle, they were the Marauders. Their successful transformations changed everything for Remus. The nights of the full moon were no longer a time of lonely agony. They became a time of wild, exhilarating freedom. Once Remus was safely in the Shrieking Shack, James, Sirius, and Peter would slip out of the castle under James's invisibility cloak, another of his incredible inheritances, and join him. As Prongs, Padfoot, and Wormtail, they would lead the werewolf out of the shack, through the tunnel under the Whomping Willow, and into the Forbidden Forest. There, they would run together under the moonlight, a strange and wonderful pack of 4. The stag, the dog, and the rat kept the wolf in check, preventing it from harming itself or others. For the first time in his life, Remus experienced something close to happiness during his transformations. He had a pack. He had his friends. The secret that had once been his greatest shame became the foundation of their shared identity. It was in these moonlit romps through the forest that they learned every secret path, every hidden corner of the Hogwarts grounds. This knowledge, born of loyalty and necessity, would soon lead to their most legendary creation. The Marauders map was a masterpiece of magical invention. a testament to the combined genius and audacity of its creators. On the surface, it was a simple, blank piece of parchment. But when touched with a wand and the words, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," it would come to life. Intricate lines of ink would spread across its surface, revealing a detailed map of every floor, every corridor, every classroom, and every secret passage of Hogwarts Castle. But it was more than just a map. It was a living, breathing tracker of every person within the castle walls. Tiny, labeled dots moved through the hallways, showing the real-time location of every student, every teacher, every ghost, and even Peeves, the poltergeist. The map was imbued with a cheeky, arrogant personality that perfectly reflected its creators. It offered helpful suggestions for mischief makers and hurled insults at those who tried to pry into its secrets, most notably their greasy-haired arch-nemesis, Severus Snape. To hide its contents, one simply had to tap it with a wand and say, "Mischief managed." The magic required to create such an object was astonishingly advanced. It involved complex charms, including the homunculus charm to track the movements of people, as well as enchantments to repel the prying eyes of their enemies. The map was their legacy, a tool that allowed them to navigate the castle with impunity, to sneak into Hogsmeade for illicit supplies of sweets and Zonko's joke products, and to avoid their least favorite teachers and the school caretaker, Argus Filch. It was the ultimate tool for a group of mischief makers who saw the school rules as suggestions rather than commands. They were the kings of the castle, popular, clever, and daring. James and Sirius, in particular, were adored by many of their peers. They were handsome, charismatic, and the undisputed leaders of Gryffindor's social scene. But their reign was not without its dark side. Their arrogance, particularly James's, often manifested as casual cruelty, and the primary target of this cruelty was a Slytherin boy named Severus Snape. Snape was a stark contrast to the Marauders. He was pale, withdrawn, and had a bitter, resentful demeanor. He came from a poor, unhappy home, and he was fascinated by the dark arts. From their very first day on the Hogwarts Express, he and James had clashed. This initial animosity festered and grew over their years at Hogwarts, fueled by house rivalry and a mutual, bitter jealousy. Snape was jealous of James's popularity, his wealth, and his talent. James was jealous of Snape's close friendship with Lily Evans, a brilliant and kind-hearted Muggle-born witch in Gryffindor. Lily Evans was everything James admired. She was beautiful, with striking dark red hair and brilliant, almond-shaped green eyes. But more than that, she was intelligent, fiercely principled, and unafraid to stand up to him. From their first year, James was infatuated with her, but he expressed his feelings with an immaturity that only pushed her away. He showed off in front of her, hexing other students for a laugh, and strutting around the castle as if he owned it. Lily saw him not as a charming rogue, but as an arrogant, bullying tow-rag. She despised his treatment of Snape, who had been her childhood friend. She saw his pranks not as harmless fun, but as acts of mean-spirited cruelty. The conflict between them all came to a head in a moment that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. A moment that would later be known as Snape's worst memory. It was after their defense against the dark arts OWL exam in their 5th year. The Marauders were in high spirits, lounging by the lake on a sunny afternoon. James was idly playing with a snitch, showing off for the crowd. When Snape walked past, James, spurred on by Sirius, decided to amuse himself at Snape's expense. He hexed him, lifting him into the air and dangling him upside down, exposing his grayed underwear to a crowd of laughing students. It was a public, humiliating act of bullying, pure and simple. Lily Evans, seeing the commotion, rushed over and demanded that James leave Snape alone. James, eager to impress her, agreed, but on the condition that she go out with him. Lily, disgusted by his arrogance and his use of her friend's humiliation as a bargaining chip, refused, unleashing a tirade against his inflated ego. In his own humiliation and rage, the dangling Snape, desperate to wound Lily as she had wounded his pride by defending him, screamed a word at her that could never be taken back. He called her a mudblood. The slur, the foulest insult one could use against a muggle-born witch, hung in the air, instantly silencing the crowd. The effect on Lily was devastating. Her friendship with Snape, already strained by his growing obsession with the dark arts and his unsavory Slytherin friends, was shattered in that moment. But the incident also had a profound effect on James. For the first time, he was forced to see his actions through Lily's eyes. He saw not a hero, but a bully. He saw the cruelty that she saw. The shame of that day became a turning point for him. He began to mature, to deflate his ego, and to treat others with more kindness and respect. He never lost his mischievous streak, but the casual cruelty began to fade, replaced by a genuine desire to be a better person, a person worthy of Lily Evans's affection. There was another, even darker incident that occurred during their time at school, a prank that went too far and nearly had catastrophic consequences. Sirius, in his loathing for Snape and his reckless disregard for the rules, decided to play a joke on him. He told Snape how to get past the Whomping Willow, knowing full well that at the end of the tunnel was a fully transformed and incredibly dangerous werewolf. It was a malicious and potentially fatal act. Snape, consumed by his own obsession to expose the Marauders and their secrets, took the bait. He followed Sirius's instructions and was heading down the tunnel towards a gruesome death when James, realizing what Sirius had done, intervened. He stopped Snape just in time, saving his life. But the damage was done. The secret of Remus's lycanthropy was now known to Snape, and Dumbledore was forced to forbid him from ever speaking of it. The incident created a life debt between Snape and James, a debt that Snape would resent for the rest of his life. He saw James's intervention not as a heroic act, but as a self-serving one, a way for James to avoid getting into trouble. The event further cemented Snape's hatred for all the Marauders, a hatred that would have far-reaching and devastating consequences. Despite these darker moments, their final years at Hogwarts were, for the most part, a golden age. James finally matured enough for Lily to see the good man beneath the arrogant boy. She saw his fierce loyalty to his friends, his courage, and his unwavering sense of what was right. They began dating in their 7th year and fell deeply in love. James became head boy and Lily head girl. They were a golden couple, leaders of their house and their year, poised on the brink of a bright and promising future. The 4 Marauders had grown from boys into men. They were powerful wizards, bound by a friendship that seemed indestructible, ready to take on the world. But the world that awaited them beyond the castle walls was a dark and terrifying place. While they had been living their carefree school days, a shadow had been lengthening over the wizarding world. Lord Voldemort had risen to power, and the First Wizarding War was about to begin. The transition from the relative safety of Hogwarts to the grim reality of a world at war was a brutal one. The wizarding community was gripped by a climate of fear and paranoia. Lord Voldemort and his followers, the Death Eaters, were no longer a shadowy cult operating on the fringes of society. They were a full-blown terrorist organization, waging a campaign of violence and intimidation. Their ideology of pure-blood supremacy, once confined to the drawing rooms of ancient families like the Blacks, was now the justification for open slaughter. Muggles were being tortured and murdered for sport. Muggle-born witches and wizards were being hunted down, their disappearances a common feature in the Daily Prophet. Entire families were vanishing overnight, suspected of opposing the Dark Lord. The Ministry of Magic, infiltrated by spies and crippled by fear, was fighting a losing battle. Aurors, the elite dark wizard catchers, were being killed faster than they could be replaced. No one knew who to trust. A friendly neighbor could be a Death Eater. A trusted colleague could be under the Imperious curse. The world the Marauders had stepped into was one of whispered conversations, of drawn curtains, and of the constant, sickening fear that you or your loved ones could be next. For James, Sirius, Remus, and Lily, there was no question of staying neutral. They were brave, they were powerful, and they believed in fighting for what was right. Almost immediately after graduating from Hogwarts in 1978, they joined a secret organization dedicated to opposing Voldemort, the Order of the Phoenix. The Order was founded and led by Albus Dumbledore, the only wizard Voldemort ever truly feared. It was a vigilante group, operating outside the law, comprised of witches and wizards who were willing to risk their lives to fight the Dark Lord. The original order was a small, dedicated band of heroes. Among its members were formidable figures like Alastair Mad-Eye Moody, the greatest Auror of his time, the kind and courageous Longbottoms, Frank and Alice, the unflappable Minerva McGonagall, and many others who would become martyrs in the fight against darkness. The Marauders, young, brilliant, and full of defiant energy, threw themselves into the war effort. They were frontline soldiers in a secret war. Their missions were dangerous, their lives constantly at risk. They engaged in skirmishes with Death Eaters, conducted surveillance on suspected spies, and acted as guards for those targeted by Voldemort. They were a formidable team. James, a natural leader and a powerful duelist, Sirius, a reckless but brilliant fighter. Remus, his quiet intelligence a strategic asset. And even Peter, who, buoyed by the courage of his friends, participated in the fight. Lily, too, was a member of the Order, a remarkably gifted witch whose defensive charms were said to be legendary. They were all so young, barely out of their teens, fighting a war against a darkness that threatened to consume their entire world. The carefree days of schoolboy pranks were a distant memory, replaced by the grim realities of battle, of loss, and of the constant, gnawing fear for their friends' lives. James and Lily married soon after leaving Hogwarts, a defiant act of love and hope in a world consumed by hatred. Sirius Black was their best man, a testament to the unbreakable bond between the two friends. James had inherited a vast fortune from his parents, who had sadly passed away from dragonpox shortly after he graduated. He and Lily used this wealth to support the Order, and to support their friend Remus Lupin, who, as a werewolf, found it nearly impossible to find steady employment. The wizarding world was deeply prejudiced against werewolves, and even in peacetime, Remus had struggled. In wartime, it was worse. He was an outcast, viewed with suspicion even by some in his own camp. But James and Lily provided him with a home, a family, and a purpose. Their small circle of friends became their sanctuary, a pocket of warmth and light in the encroaching darkness. Sometime in late 1979 or early 1980, a moment occurred that would seal their fate. The event took place not on a battlefield, but in a dusty room above the Hog's Head pub in Hogsmeade. Albus Dumbledore was conducting an interview for the post of divination teacher with a woman named Sybil Trelawney. Trelawney was a fraud for the most part, a purveyor of dramatic but meaningless predictions. But on that night, in the presence of Albus Dumbledore, she entered a true trance. Her voice grew harsh, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she spoke a genuine prophecy, the first of only two she would ever make. She said, "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." The prophecy was overheard, in part, by a Death Eater. That Death Eater was Severus Snape. Eager to curry favor with his master, Snape rushed to Voldemort and relayed what he had heard, that a child would be born at the end of July who would have the power to destroy him. Voldemort, the most powerful dark wizard of all time, who had taken countless steps to ensure his own immortality, became obsessed with this prophecy. He was determined to neutralize this threat before it could ever materialize. There were two children who fit the prophecy's description. The first was Neville Longbottom, a pure-blood wizard born on July 30th to Frank and Alice Longbottom, two of the Order's most respected members. The second was Harry Potter, a half-blood wizard born on July 31st to James and Lily Potter. Both sets of parents had defied Voldemort 3 times, escaping him in battle on 3 separate occasions. Voldemort had to choose which child the prophecy referred to, and in a decision that would shape the course of wizarding history, he chose Harry. Perhaps it was because Harry, like Voldemort himself, was a half-blood. Perhaps it was a manifestation of his deep-seated hatred for James Potter. Whatever the reason, Voldemort marked Harry Potter as his equal, and in doing so, he set the prophecy in motion. When Snape learned that Voldemort had interpreted the prophecy to mean Lily Evans's son, he was horrified. His obsessive, unrequited love for Lily, a love he had carried since childhood, had never faded. He had become a Death Eater, embracing the dark magic she despised. But the thought of her being killed was unbearable to him. He went to Dumbledore, terrified, and begged him to protect her. He offered Dumbledore anything in return. Dumbledore, seeing an opportunity, agreed to hide the Potters, and in return, Snape became a double agent, a spy for the Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore knew that no ordinary protection would be enough to save the Potters. Voldemort was at the height of his power, and he would stop at nothing to get to the child. He advised the Potters to go into hiding, to disappear completely from the wizarding world. To protect them, he suggested the use of one of the most powerful and ancient protective enchantments in existence, the Fidelius Charm. The Fidelius Charm is a piece of incredibly complex magic that takes a secret and implants it into the soul of a single living person, the Secret Keeper. This secret becomes impossible to find. It cannot be discovered by force, by magic, or by torture. The information is locked away inside the Secret Keeper, and can only be revealed if the Secret Keeper chooses to divulge it voluntarily. The Potter's secret would be their location. Once the charm was cast, their house in the village of Godric's Hollow would become invisible, unplottable, and undiscoverable to anyone who had not been told the secret by the Secret Keeper. Even if Voldemort pressed his face against their living room window, he would not be able to see them. It was the ultimate form of protection. The choice of Secret Keeper was, therefore, a matter of life and death. The person had to be someone the Potters trusted with their very lives. The obvious choice was Sirius Black. He was James's best friend, closer than a brother. He was Harry's godfather. He was brave, loyal, and would have died before betraying them. And so, the initial plan was for Sirius to be the Secret Keeper. But Sirius, ever the rebel, ever thinking one step ahead of the enemy, had a different idea. He was a clever strategist, but in this instance, his cleverness would prove to be their undoing. He reasoned that Voldemort would expect him to be the Secret Keeper. He was the obvious choice, and therefore, he would be Voldemort's primary target. He would be hunted, captured, and tortured for the secret. So Sirius proposed a double bluff, a last-minute switch. He suggested that they use someone Voldemort would never suspect, someone unassuming, someone no one would ever think was important enough to be entrusted with such a vital secret. He suggested they use Peter Pettigrew. To the outside world, Sirius would remain the decoy. Everyone, including Dumbledore, would believe that Sirius was the secret keeper. Only 4 people would know the truth: James, Lily, Sirius, and Peter himself. It seemed like a masterful piece of wartime strategy. They were hiding their most precious secret behind their most underestimated friend. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had failed to see that the war had taken its toll on Peter. His inherent weakness, his fear, and his desperate desire for self-preservation had been festering in the climate of terror. He had been watching the war unfold, seeing the power of Voldemort, the number of wizards flocking to his side, and he had come to a coward's conclusion. The Order of the Phoenix was losing. For at least a year before the Potters went into hiding, Peter Pettigrew had been passing information to Voldemort. He was a spy for the other side. His motivations were born of pure terror. He was not a true believer in Voldemort's ideology. He was simply a weak man who saw the Dark Lord as the winning side, and he wanted to be on it. He was terrified of Voldemort, but he was more terrified of what Voldemort's powerful followers would do to him if he refused them. He was offered protection, a place in the new world order that Voldemort was promising, and in exchange, all he had to do was betray the friends who had loved him, protected him, and accepted him for his entire life. When Sirius Black came to him and offered him the role of secret keeper, it was as if Peter had been handed the lives of his friends on a silver platter. He accepted the sacred trust, knowing full well that he was going to break it, and so the Fidelius charm was cast. The secret of the Potter's location was placed into the soul of Peter Pettigrew. James, Lily, and their infant son Harry disappeared from the world, safe in their hidden cottage in Godric's Hollow. They were completely isolated, cut off from their friends and the war raging outside. Their only contact with the outside world was through their secret keeper. For a year, they lived in this strange, suspended state of safety and imprisonment. They celebrated Harry's first birthday. They lived the quiet life of a young family, all the while knowing that a monstrous evil was hunting them. They placed their absolute faith in the loyalty of their friend, never suspecting for a moment that their chosen protector was, in fact, their Judas. Then came the night of October 31st, 1981. Halloween. Peter Pettigrew, seeing his opportunity, went to his master and divulged the secret. He told Lord Voldemort the location of the Potter family. The ultimate protection offered by the Fidelius charm was instantly broken. The path to Godric's Hollow was now open. Voldemort, armed with the prophecy and the Potter's location, set out to eliminate the threat to his power once and for all. The evening in Godric's Hollow was quiet, the air crisp with the chill of late autumn. Inside their small cottage, the Potter family was settling in for the night. James was in the living room, playing with his 1-year-old son, Harry, conjuring magical colored smoke from the tip of his wand for the baby's amusement. Lily was in the kitchen, preparing for the evening. There was a sense of peace, a fragile domesticity that belied the terrible danger they were in. And then, the gate at the end of their garden path creaked open. Voldemort had arrived. He moved with a silent, terrifying grace, a figure of absolute darkness against the twilight. James heard the sound, and his head snapped up. He didn't need to see who it was. He knew. He screamed to his wife, "Lily, take Harry and go. It's him. Run. I'll hold him off." He was a brave man and a powerful wizard, but he was caught completely off guard. He didn't even have his wand. It was on the sofa, just out of reach. He threw himself in front of the door, a desperate, futile attempt to buy his family a few more seconds of life. Voldemort blasted the door open, and with a flash of green light and a laugh, devoid of all humor, James Potter was dead before his body hit the floor. Upstairs, Lily heard her husband's last cry. In a state of pure, adrenaline-fueled terror, she scooped Harry out of his high chair and ran to his nursery at the back of the house. She barricaded the door with a chair, a pathetic defense against the most powerful dark wizard in the world. She knew she was trapped. There was no escape. She could hear his footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, savoring the moment. The nursery door burst open, and he was there, a figure with a chalk-white, skull-like face and red, glowing eyes. He looked at her, and his voice was high and cold. "Stand aside, you silly girl. Stand aside now." Lily stood in front of her son's crib, her arms spread wide, shielding him with her body. She was begging, her voice raw with a mother's desperation. "Not Harry, not Harry, please not Harry." Voldemort repeated his command, "Stand aside." But Lily refused to move. "Not Harry, please no, take me, kill me instead." She pleaded for her son's life, offering her own in exchange. Voldemort, who could not understand the power of such selfless love, grew impatient. "This is my last warning." But Lily's final, desperate plea interrupted him. "Not Harry. Please. Have mercy. Have mercy." With another flash of green light, Lily Potter fell to the floor, dead. Voldemort had murdered her without a second thought, but in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. By offering her life for her sons, Lily had invoked an ancient and powerful magic, a sacrificial protection, a magic that Voldemort, in his arrogance and his ignorance of the deeper, more powerful forms of magic, did not understand. He had cleared the path to the child, the final obstacle removed. He raised his wand, pointed it at the face of the crying baby, and uttered the two words that had ended so many lives, Avada Kedavra. The green jet of light shot from his wand and struck the baby in the forehead, but it did not kill him. Lily's love, her sacrifice, had created a shield around her son. The killing curse, the unblockable curse that had never failed, rebounded. It struck Voldemort himself. The curse ripped his soul from his body, destroying him, but not killing him. His soul, already unstable from the creation of his Horcruxes, was torn from its mortal shell, a powerless, spectral form, less than the meanest ghost. He fled in agony and terror, the prophecy he had tried to subvert having come to pass in the most unexpected way. The nursery was a wreck. The force of the rebounding curse had blown a hole in the side of the house. James and Lily Potter were dead, and in his crib, with a lightning bolt-shaped scar on his forehead. The infant Harry Potter was crying. The First Wizarding War was over, brought to an end not by an army of wizards, but by the love of a mother and the survival of a child. The news of Voldemort's fall spread like wildfire through the wizarding world. There were celebrations in the streets, parties that lasted for days. But for those closest to the Potters, the night was one of unimaginable horror and grief. Sirius Black had a growing sense of unease. He had arranged to meet Peter Pettigrew to check on him, but Peter never showed. A cold dread filled Sirius, and he raced to Godric's Hollow on his enchanted flying motorcycle. What he found there shattered his world. The Potter's cottage was a ruin, the roof blown off, the dark mark hanging in the sky above it. He ran inside and found the body of his best friend, James, lying in the hallway. He ran upstairs and found Lily, lifeless on the floor of the nursery. And in the crib, he found Harry, alive. Sirius's first instinct was to take Harry, to fulfill his duty as godfather, and raise the boy himself. But then Rubeus Hagrid, the Hogwarts gamekeeper, arrived, under orders from Dumbledore to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. Sirius, in a state of shock and grief, reluctantly agreed, offering Hagrid his flying motorcycle to complete the journey. But as Hagrid departed with the precious cargo, Sirius's grief began to curdle into a burning, all-consuming rage. He knew there was only one person who could have betrayed the Potters. There was only one person who could have led Voldemort to their door: Peter Pettigrew. He tracked Peter down the next day to a busy Muggle street. Peter was cornered, and for a moment it seemed justice would be done. Sirius, his face a mask of fury and grief, confronted him. "Lily and James, Peter, how could you?" But Peter was a cornered rat, and like a rat, he was vicious when trapped. He began to scream, shouting for the whole street to hear, accusing Sirius of the very crime he himself had committed. "Lily and James, you betrayed them, Sirius. You killed them." The Muggles on the street stopped and stared, confused and frightened by the two screaming wizards. Before Sirius could react, Peter did something monstrously clever. He pulled out his own wand, blasted the street with a powerful curse that killed 12 Muggles instantly, and in the ensuing chaos, he cut off his own index finger, transformed into his rat animagus form, and scurried down into the sewer, disappearing into the labyrinth of pipes beneath the city. The Aurors from the Ministry of Magic arrived to a scene of absolute carnage. A crater in the street, 12 dead Muggles, and Sirius Black standing in the middle of it all, laughing. He wasn't laughing with amusement. It was the hysterical, broken laughter of a man whose entire world had just been destroyed. A man who had just been outsmarted by the weakest and most pathetic person he had ever known. To the Aurors, it was an open and shut case. The evidence was overwhelming. Pettigrew's severed finger was found at the scene. Dozens of eyewitnesses had heard Pettigrew accuse Sirius. Sirius Black, the known best friend of the Potters, the man everyone believed was their secret keeper, had betrayed them to Voldemort, murdered Peter Pettigrew when he was confronted, and then slaughtered a street full of Muggles for good measure. He was arrested on the spot. The wizarding world, desperate for a scapegoat and reeling from the years of war, did not give Sirius Black a trial. Barty Crouch Sr., the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was championing a ruthless, hardline approach to justice. Suspected Death Eaters were being rounded up and sent to Azkaban without proper legal proceedings. Sirius Black, the scion of a dark family with a mountain of circumstantial evidence against him, was condemned. He was thrown into Azkaban, the wizarding prison, a fortress on a desolate island guarded by Dementors, foul creatures that feed on happiness and leave their victims with nothing but their worst memories. For the crime of betraying his best friends, a crime he did not commit, Sirius Black was sentenced to a lifetime of torment in the darkest, most hellish place on Earth. The legacy of the Marauders was shattered, their story twisted into a cautionary tale of treachery. James and Lily were dead, remembered as heroes who defied Voldemort. Sirius was imprisoned, his name becoming synonymous with betrayal. Peter was believed to be a hero, a brave wizard who had confronted his friend's killer and paid the ultimate price, posthumously awarded the Order of Merlin, First Class, and Remus Lupin was left utterly, devastatingly alone. He was in the north of the country on an Order mission when he heard the news. He heard that Voldemort had been vanquished, but that James and Lily were dead. Then he heard that Sirius Black had been their betrayer, that he had killed Peter. In one fell swoop, Remus lost all three of his friends. He had believed in Sirius's innocence for a single day, but the evidence presented in the Daily Prophet and Dumbledore's own silence on the matter convinced him otherwise. The grief was overwhelming. The four boys who had been his pack, his family, the ones who had made his cursed life bearable, were gone. He was once again the lonely outcast he had always believed himself to be. He drifted, taking on menial jobs that he could never keep. His lycanthropy always being discovered, his life a constant struggle against poverty and the crushing weight of his loneliness and grief. And so the story of the Marauders, a story that began with such bright, shining friendship, ended in the darkest of tragedies. A bond forged in loyalty and love was ultimately destroyed by the pressures of war, the poison of fear, and the weakness of a single, cowardly heart. The cost of the conflict was not just the lives of James and Lily Potter, or the countless others who perished in the First Wizarding War. It was the destruction of a friendship that had once been a beacon of light in a dark world. It was the 12 years of stolen life from an innocent man in Azkaban. It was the lonely, impoverished existence of a good man, haunted by a curse he never asked for. And it was the pathetic hidden life of a traitor, living as a rat, forever running from the ghosts of the friends he had condemned. The Marauders were no more, their map left behind, their story a half-told tragedy, waiting for a new generation to uncover the truth. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the shadows of the past. I hope this tale has brought you some measure of peace and reflection.